Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So, the big talk, or at least one of them, is on the abortion ban. And so, Michigan has its take on the abortion ban. So, Michigan lawmakers okayed a ban on abortion procedure, veto vowed. And this is out of the Associated Press by David Edgert or Edgert. I may not be pronouncing that correctly because some people's names are a little bit different in pronunciation. So it's either Eggert or Edgert. So here we have Lansing, Michigan. Michigan Republican led legislature voted Tuesday to ban a common second trimester abortion procedure, pushing ahead with legislation Democratic Governor um, Gretchen Whitmer. Okay, so hopefully I said that correctly. Um, so it was said that she would veto it. And so the bill would prohibit physicians from performing abortion by dilation and evacuation except to save a woman's life. Abortion or anti abortion, that is, advocates refer to the procedure by the non medical term dismemberment abortion. So, the procedure in which the fetus is removed in pieces with a surgical instrument, such as forceps, was used in 1,777 or 6.7% of abortions in the state in 2017. So it accounted for half of all second trimester abortions, including 78% done after the 16th week of pregnancy. So the Senate and the House passed identical legislation on 22-16 and 58-50, or 22 to 16 and 58 to 51 party line votes. So at the time, at, at a time Republicans across the U.S. are advancing tough anti abortion bills they hope can pass muster with the Supreme Court. So, this is the big thing that's going on, and a lot of famous people have spoken against this. And so, this is people who are anti abortion, are pro life, and people who are uh, for abortion and women's right to decide whether they want to keep a baby or no longer keep the baby. There's different options. Some people will give the baby up, like a safe haven. I know they had this thing where you can deliver a baby to, I believe I don't think it's law enforcement. I could be wrong, but I believe it is to like the fire department. They have like a safe baby drop off. Some places have that. And then there's putting the baby up for adoption. Those are other options. Um, and then there's situations where some feel that that doesn't work because they feel that there's going to be a kid who's going to eventually wonder who their original or biological parents are, and then they would have to then know the story. And so there's some women that are for pro-choice, the choice to make a decision whether they want to keep or not keep the baby for whatever their reasons. Now some say there's legitimate reasons. It could be health reasons. It could be situations where women might have a gene where the babies will come out with disabilities and they already know this because they've been tested for it, or they've been raped, or the girl, it might be a girl, she's not even a woman yet, and she's raped and she's pregnant. And so the parents may decide that they don't want her to have the baby. So there's a lot of different scenarios. a woman could be in a situation of molestation or incest. And so there's different perspectives on the issue. I'd say that my thing is pro-choice for women. Women should women should have the right to choose. That women should have the right to choose what they see fit, with their body, and that's my opinion. But like I can say this: there recently, I know of someone who she has a rough upbringing, and she's went through a lot of problems, and she's a drug user, and she left the baby in a drug house, and she lied, and said that she didn't know it was a drug house, which she's a drug user. She has a history of drug abuse. She left the baby in a um, one of those meth drug houses, and they were watching the house. They, as in, I guess, narcotic agents. And so when they did a sweep through the house, basically they raided the house. They took the baby away from her. And so her mother tried to go and take parenting classes to try to see if she could get the baby back. And then they not only allowed the mother, which would have been the grandmother, to take the parenting classes. She took them, but they took fingerprints of the grandmother and found that not only the mother was an unfit mother, but the grandmother also was an unfit grandmother. And so there's scenarios like that where this girl had her baby, but it was taken away, and now the baby's in the system. And so I'm just putting that out there. This is a true story, and I know this has happened to some people. And there's other stories that I know that have happened where people have their kids and they're abusive to the kids. They don't know how to parent kids, and they keep having more and more kids. And they don't feed them, they don't clothe them, they don't take them to the doctor, they don't clothe them well, that is. Um, or they dump the baby on their uh their parents. They have a baby, and they're too young to have a baby, and they dump their baby on their parents, and the grandparents end up having to raise the babies. And so there's a lot of different scenarios. So anyway, let me go on with this. But it says the Senate and the House passed identical legislation on 22 to 16 and 58 to 51 party line votes at a time Republicans across the U.S. are advocating or advancing tough anti abortion bills that they hope can pass muster with the Supreme Court, because they have to look at it and make their say and be able to pass it through. So, with Whitmer vowing to veto the measures when they are sent to her desk, as soon as next week, Right to Life is preparing to launch a citizens initiative that could be enacted by lawmakers without her signature. And so the group has successfully used the maneuver 4 times before to put anti-abortion bills into law. And so this is a horrific, barbaric procedure. And so it literally rips arms and legs off of living babies. It is not okay. And so this is not okay for any civilized person, said Genevieve Marno, legislative director for Right to Life of Michigan. So Whitmer said Tuesday she will veto the legislation. Now, I will say this: the procedure that they do isn't does not seem to me to be a great procedure at all. But I do know that there are other procedures that they could possibly use. And then there's other situations that are scenarios that might put a woman in a situation where she has no other alternative but to have an abortion, or she might go to drastic measures and seek dangerous people to abort her baby for her. And so, I've heard of young girls doing that when they know that these laws come into effect, or they know that, somebody's pressuring them to have the baby. So what ends up happening is they'll fall, or they'll cause themselves to self abort. And that isn't good either. And so I've known people who have done that, and I'm sure this will happen a lot more frequent if they pass these bills. Women will figure out ways, if they're desperate, to self abort babies. And so it's harsh, but it's just reality. And I'm just saying, I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do. But when you put these kind of laws into effect, and I'll go back to the business of what it used to be, what my mom used to tell me that they used to do, some of the women would do in the 70s. They would go to these houses, and somebody would say they knew how to abort babies, and they would pay this money. They'd use coat hangers. They would use even harsher things than this to abort fetuses, and then they would get cash for it. Certain people would do that, and it would put the woman's life at risk as well. And so this, we're going to see a trend here if these bills passed, and this is what's, I'm just pretty much foretelling what will end up happening. They're actually taking us backward into time. When you look at all of these things that they're doing, they're bringing back the past through these what people think are new laws. They're old laws that, someone said we got to stop this because girls are dying, because they're self aborting, they're harming themselves just to have abortions. We have to give women pro choice so that we have less of this. Okay, so now we're in a place we have less of this, and now somebody's saying, oh, we got to stop this. Women don't have the right to choose. The baby is more important than women's right to choose what they should do with their bodies. Even if it's a situation where the woman has been on drugs, or the woman has like constantly been in and out of incarceration, or she's been molested, or she's been raped. There's a lot of different situations that people are not considering, and or the woman has a tendency to not be a fit parent because of her lifestyle. There's a number of things that could be in play here. And so people are not really looking at the bigger picture of what this is going to cause. And I believe what it's going to cause is going to cause a lot of women to start, the ones who will do this, that is, will start trying to go back to that old time where somebody will try to profit off of this. I can give you an abortion, and it'll be between us, and you have to sign a paper so you don't sue me, but I know how to do this. Or they'll take concoctions, and they could darn near kill themselves trying to abort these babies. And so if you don't allow them to have choice, this is what you're going to send women into doing. And so, and young girls usually are the ones that are targeted for this kind of stuff. So it goes into saying that I think that these are decisions that should be made between a woman and her doctor. She said, I've always supported women's autonomy and freedom to make her own choices, and that should be no surprise to anyone in this town. So Democrats, they criticized the bills during the floor debates that drew passionate and at times tearful personal speeches from both sides of the aisle. Opponents called the legislation an unconstitutional and sexist attack, and shared stories of women who ended their pregnancy after learning the fetus would be born with severe health problems. Exactly what I was saying. And basically, I said some of the things that this article is sort of pointing out. And I know because I've had friends that have done things like this, and made hard decisions because they were afraid that their parents were going to find out that they were pregnant. So they would do drastic things that could darn near kill themselves. They could have killed themselves. And so this is what you're sending women back into. You're forcing them back into these decisions that could possibly kill them. They could kill themselves. And so you'll have more suicides. only by these decisions right here. It won't be suicides that they willingly wanted to die. Some women are trying to abort unwanted babies because of something bad that happened, or bad choices, or they know they're not going to be a good parent, or they're not ready to be a parent, and they make some hard decisions. And this is the thing that you're going to send people back into. So not only is the legislation dangerous to the health of the well-being of women, it also infringes upon the rights of patients and their families to make difficult, compassionate decisions to spare unbearable suffering, said Senate Winnie Brinks, a Grand Rapids Democrat. So the organization representing the state's doctors, the Michigan State Medical Society, also opposes the legislation. But one of the bill's sponsors, Republican Senate Tom Barrett, or Barrett of Charlotte, said legislatures were taking a stand for life, okay, by restricting a procedure that should shock the conscience of the public. So GOP Senate Ed McBroom of Vulcan acknowledged the difficulties facing any woman whose fetus has medical issues, but said, if it's a life, how can we justify snuffing it out? So dilation and evacuation, or DNE, has been barred by 12 states. Bans are in effect in Mississippi, West Virginia, but are on hold in 8 other states because of legal challenges. North Dakota's law, signed last month, and only becomes effective in a federal appeals court of the U.S. Supreme Court, allows its enforcement. Indiana's ban, which also was enacted in April, is set to take effect in July, but is being challenged in court. And you know why? Because we're going and stepping back. Even though we're in the future, we're going forward, we're moving backwards in time, where women used coat hangers to abort babies because they couldn't afford it, or they had a ban against abortion. They forbid you to abort babies, or it was religious practices that forbid you to abort babies. Um, or fetuses, they're not even babies, actual babies, but some have said there's a heartbeat bill, which they actually, when they can hear the heartbeat, you can't have an abortion. So because it proves that this is not just, it just is starting to form. It is has not. It's actually a life when it has the heartbeat, and so it's a back and forth pendulum that swings constantly back and forth. We have people that have their pro-choice, and then we have people who have their anti-choice, their choice of abortion. So there's different, reasons and scenarios, but I believe it would cause more women to make drastic, hard decisions that could put their lives at risk as well. Not only the baby or would-be baby, but two, people don't know the situations that some women are going through, because they, like I said, there could be health issues. There could also be health issues where the woman may have an STD. She knows that this kid is going to come out with the STD, or, infected, and so maybe the baby's life is already shortened, so instead of having the baby to suffer, it's like, let's not do this, so it's a lot of different scenarios. But the other thing is, before I finish this article, because it's at the end, it's saying too that if you look at the states here, it talks about, you notice it's rural states or it's southern states like Mississippi, West Virginia, places like that, that have passed these laws. And then I believe they're trying to move it over to some of the cities. I think it's harder to do it in cities, but notice it says bans are in effect in Mississippi, West Virginia. There's 8 other states. But there's legal challenges, North Dakota. They're like rural places. Now, you know what I believe this is for? I know this is going to seem like a stretch here, But I believe that this law of banning abortion is in effect because most of these places that you see here, they're either southern or they're rural areas where more either religious or white people, either or. They're religious people or they're like Angelicans, or there are white people who, if they've been reading the paper, they've been seeing all these things happening, they also know that there's a higher concentration of people of color now because if you look at Pew research, where it's a census, or at least it compiles a list of what would be a demographics in the future, that if you look at it, it's scary because for people who are Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian, white, it states that there's less people that are white future wise, that they're having less babies or they're not producing as many babies as people that are considered people of color. And so I believe the reason why this abortion ban is going on is because they're hoping that the numbers of babies will increase in the white population. And I know that sounds like a bit of a stretch, but I have a feeling that that has a lot to do with it because most of the people who are backing this abortion bill, this anti abortion bill, are Republicans. And most of your Republicans that are the GOP, most of them, the ones that stand out the most usually are they're older white males. And so looking at it from that standpoint of view, this anti-abortion bill was not for people of color because what how it impacts people of color in a negative way is if you're in an let's say you're in a situation where you don't have a lot of resources, your resources are limited, you don't have a lot of medical insurance or you don't have a lot of support systems in place. And if you end up getting pregnant and you can't have an abortion, then it may put you in a situation where you're more needy now because you're needy not only because of your own circumstance, but now you have more mouths to feed, and so it puts you at a disadvantage, which then, if you're not really that great of a parent or you need parenting classes or you don't have any parenting skills, that puts you at a disadvantage. If you don't have a lot of income, that puts you at a disadvantage if you have more children, because children don't make you richer if you're already broke. They make you have to really think seriously about saving money and putting them first. So you're going to make sacrifices and you're probably going to be broker because diapers are expensive, formula is expensive, food's expensive, doctor visits are expensive, among all other things. And so I believe people who are in a situation where they're couples or they have more resources and they have more of a family network, they live in rural areas where there's farms and the living is different. Maybe the income is different for them. They might can afford things in a different way. They're not living the city life where it's a lot of expensive living. It might be easier for them to just have, more children and be able to manage with the children and manage with their home life because they're not living in the city. And so things might be a lot different. And they have more resources and support systems in place. As to people in the city, you're just trying to make ends meet because you're trying to keep a roof over your head. So there's different situations. Of course, I'm not saying that that couldn't happen for somebody in the city. Maybe they do have support systems, they can find people, but that's not always the case for some people. Some people are in situations where they don't have a lot of family members or support systems in place. So if they have babies, it's not just having a baby, but it's is it do you want to have this baby live in poverty along with you? So you can be more poor and in more poverty. And so those are choices. So what we really should be talking about is maybe not getting in a situation where you have to make those decisions of whether or not to have an abortion. And so those are the things maybe they should be putting in places, like parenting classes, or they should, be putting resources centers out there for people who don't have a lot, who do have kids and they need help. And then those who are not trying to get in a situation like that, maybe they should allow for women to have access to birth control. Now, some religions don't believe in that. And so that also causes another problem for some women. Women who come from family backgrounds who have really strict religions where they don't believe in birth control might end up getting pregnant and not wanting to be a young parent. So where does that put them to make those hard decisions? Should we have an abortion? Should we have an illegal abortion? And so you're going to bring that time back where women are going to have illegal abortions. They're going to have unlicensed people, unsanitary situations, and that can put their lives at risk because they're desperate to have an abortion because they come from families that are Catholic or Anglican, or they have these strict religious beliefs, or they want to try to get their kid to have kids, their children that produce children, and they're not ready yet. Or they get in a relationship, the relationship doesn't work out, the father leaves, the mother leaves, all kinds of stuff. Drugs are involved, like what I kind of put out that scenario. And so I don't think these people have really thought all of this out. And so, yeah, there are two sides. There's more than two sides to all of this. And so I think this anti abortion ban might be jumping the gun, and it might create a whole whirlwind of other problems. So, what do you think? The Michigan, as it goes on, it says the Michigan legislation would modify a ban on a method that opponents call partial birth abortions to also include the dilation and evacuation procedures. So it would be a crime for physicians and others to use the D&E method. So punishable by up to 2 years in prison and a $50,000 fine. And so I also heard that women could go to jail for having an abortion. And who are those women, I believe? Well, they are talking about building more prisons and more prison cells, and I believe most of the women who will end up going to jail, most of them might end up being black females. You know, it used to be, women were in jail. You might see some white women that are in jail for having abortions, drastic abortions. There might be a lot of that. And, women were going to jail because something happened between them and a boyfriend, or they were involved in some kind of drug activity, prostitution, petty crime. Now you're going to have women in prison serving time because they had an abortion. And the jail cells are going to fill up with women now because of this. And so this is the thing that I believe that they're also trying to put in play. And I believe most of the women who are going to be a little bit more militant about having an abortion will probably be maybe white women who totally don't want to follow the religious law of the letter. And then there's going to be some black females probably that are going to just say, oh no, I do what I want with my body. You can't tell me not do what I want with my body. And those are going to be the new inmates of some of those prisons because of an abortion, making a decision to choose what they wanted to do with their body. And somebody said in a law on a piece of paper that you couldn't do it. So now you're locked up for 2, 3 years because of a decision that somebody else made that you couldn't make about your body. So this is where we're at. And so what do you think about this? This to me, I think is pretty disgusting, um, that people are stooping to this decision to do this. I think it's up to the woman and her doctor to make the best decision on what they should do. And I believe options should be put out there. There are other alternatives as well. And I believe women should have the right to choose that. Two, there are a lot of people who have already had abortions and they know why. And some women maybe didn't want to ever have kids. Maybe they knew they weren't going to be, you know, ready ever to be a mother. Maybe they wanted to adopt children instead. You know, there's different scenarios for everybody, you know. So I'm just saying, what are your thoughts and feedback on this situation? This is pretty a heated debate. A lot of famous people have taken to social media about these issues because a lot of them feel like this is really wrong because it's taking the rights of women to choose what they want to do with their bodies in terms of medical procedures and practices that we've always in this time known to be legal. And so now they're pretty much trying to overturn all of that stuff. And I feel like it's going to make a lot of people hurt themselves, make bad choices where they're going to force abortion or they're going to go to people who are not licensed to practice abortion, you know, procedures, and they're going to do it illegal. You know, go back to coat hangers and doing things. You think those D&E things are really bad? You should hear of the stories that happened back when girls were going to these, you know, quack doctors. This they call themselves doctors, or you know, and they were getting money and they were having illegal abortions. You know, so apparently, you know, those times were so long ago that people's memory are short, or they didn't grow up at that time, or they didn't know anyone who grew up in that time. They didn't care to share with them those horrific stories, how horrific those were. So, with that being said, I'm going to let this video go. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for listening. But what do you think about this? Should women have the right to choose what they do to their body? Within reason, you know, should they have the right to choose, or should some lawmakers, a bunch of people who don't have any, you know, they don't even know what you're going through, they don't know what your emotional situation or state is, have the right to set up a piece of paper and put into law what you should and should not do to your body? If they can do this, what other laws are they going to come out with? It's only the first step. Thanks for listening.